The House has resumed. The House is considering the excise and excise-equivalent duties, tables, tobacco products amendment bill. Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It gives me a tremendous amount of pleasure to rise and speak in support of this bill. Labor supports this bill because we all understand, every member in this chamber understands that we need to do something to curb the prevalence of smoking rates in New Zealand. And Labor is supporting this bill because it is an evidence-based bill. The evidence tells us that increasing the price of tobacco products through increasing taxation does result in a reduction in the consumption of tobacco products, and a reduction in the consumption will result in a reduction of the harm and the appalling diseases that we associate with tobacco smoking. I'd also like to add my personal support for the bill because, like the Minister, and I have no doubt many other members in the chamber, I too have lost close family members and loved ones who have passed far too early in their lives as a result of an addiction to tobacco. And it is worth reminding ourselves just why it is that we need to fight the terrible scourge on our society that is tobacco addiction, because it is a proven cause of many cancers, not just lung cancer, although that is the most common and often the most aggressive and most well known. But other cancers are also caused by tobacco smoking, but a whole range of other diseases as well: cardiovascular disease, chronic heart disease, stroke, respiratory system harm, respiratory tract infections, asthma, and a whole range of diseases are related to cigarette smoking. And those diseases don't just occur amongst people who smoke cigarettes themselves. They also occur amongst those who are exposed to second-hand smoke, most particularly and most sadly the children of those people who are addicted to tobacco products. So it is important that we take this issue seriously and that we do everything that we can to curb tobacco smoking prevalence in New Zealand. And as I said, the evidence tells us that this measure that the House is undertaking this evening is a significant measure to achieve that. But there are also a range of other significant measures that we could be considering at the same time. And indeed, a number of people, especially those who have recently been submitting to the Māori Affairs Select Committee on their inquiry into the effect of tobacco on Māori, and I acknowledge Hone Harawira for his efforts in bringing that inquiry to the fore. A number of submitters have said now is actually the time for a package of proposals, and they point to things like banning tobacco displays, like regulating and indeed licensing tobacco retailers. They look at increased funding for cessation programs. They look at a whole range of different measures which we could also be looking at tonight. And they have evidence to support, there is evidence to support those measures as well. And perhaps it is a little bit of a pity that we have a single issue bill before us this evening. But since this is the only measure which has been put before the House, and since the evidence supports doing this, Labor will support going ahead. And of course, Labor has always supported the use of increased taxes to decrease the prevalence. Well, it's interesting what some of the members opposite are getting into, and I will address that. And Labor has always supported this measure. Of course, there is no U-turn here tonight from the Labor Party, but this is a significant change in approach, it has to be said, from the National Party. And indeed, the last time we addressed this issue, the National Party opposed an increase on taxes. And we have, of course, already addressed and perhaps had a little bit of mirth at recalling some of the statements made by Dr Paul Hutchison and the Honourable Bill English the last time the House looked at this. But I was interested in what some of the other current government members had to say on this, and I found a speech presented by the Honourable Peter Dunn, who at the time found himself in an unusual position. He was in opposition. He is a man for all seasons. He is a man for all seasons, but this time he found himself in opposition, and he said this. One thing that needs to be said at the outset is that this is a most unusual situation. I can never recall seeing the House take extraordinary urgency to allow the government to break an election promise. And he then went on to say that the then Labour Alliance government had only ever spoken about increasing taxes, increasing the top income tax rate, and that increasing taxes on tobacco was a broken election promise. Well, what an interesting statement when we consider all the possibilities, all the options that the government have in front of them to deal with reducing smoking prevalence in New Zealand, all the things like tobacco displays, like the possible licensing of retailers, like increasing funding for cessation programs. Of all the things they had to choose was an increase on tax. Was this not the party that got elected on promises to cut taxes, and yet here we are tonight with the National Party, a newfound National Party, revelling in the fact that they are increasing taxes. And whilst the Labour Party supports this, we are slightly surprised that this is the first choice that the National Government has chosen in fighting smoking prevalence. So, in supporting this, we must make the point that although the objective this evening is not to increase revenue, that inevitably revenue will be increased. And it will be important, and the Honourable Ruth Dyson already mentioned this, that when we get to budget time, that we do look at exactly what expenditure the government announces around cessation, and particularly around public health policies, because whilst it is important to focus on cessation, it is also important to focus on ensuring that our young people do not take up smoking in the first place. It is fantastic if we can get people to give up the smokes, but it would be so much better if we could actually convince people not to start smoking in the first place. Because once you are addicted, your ability to exercise personal choice and personal responsibility is absolutely diminished. So the far better option is to actually ensure that people don't take up smoking in the first place. And I have no doubt that this bill that is passing through the House under extraordinary urgency this evening will assist in achieving that. But we can do more. And we will be looking, the opposition will be looking to see what the government does at budget time to actually improve not just cessation programs, but public health initiatives that work with doctors and nurses and other people in the community and actually getting out there, reaching our young people and ensuring that the message gets out there not to take up smoking in the first place. It would be a real pity, Mr. Speaker, if this increase in the taxation on tobacco products simply mirrored the increase that will be experienced on GST, if it was simply used to mitigate the cuts to the top rate of personal income tax, the cuts to the tax that is paid by people who can most afford to pay tax, because it has been mentioned tonight that this tax will be a tax which will affect a lot of people who cannot afford it, and we hope that that convinces people to actually give up smoking altogether. But it would be a shame, it would be an absolute shame if a measure which is being done in the name of public health simply became an opportunity to increase revenue, to make up for the lost revenue that the government will lose when it cuts taxes to those who are most capable of paying tax. I hope that doesn't occur, Mr. Speaker, and I will look very closely at what this government comes to do at budget time. But I would just like to wrap up by saying we absolutely support this bill. We support the work of Minister Turia. We support the fact that she has been able to convince the National Party to do a U-turn on its previous positions. Even Dr Paul Hutchison has been prepared to take an absolute U-turn on his previous position and has been able to support the bill this evening. And I'd like to support Minister Turia and absolutely compliment